for last, it's time for pitching previews. Welcome in to Fantasy Baseball today on Thursday, February 13th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show...
Wait. Are you suggesting we're not doing a relief pitcher preview? Is that what you're telling me right now? Spoiler alert?
That's why I wrote pitching previews, Scott.
Oh, you sneaky devil.
3 starting pitcher previews and then 1 relief pitcher preview, which we will get to.
That's all it deserves. Yeah.
Yes. But today is part 1 of our starting pitcher preview. Before we get into ADP, there is a lot to talk about. I really kind of went down a rabbit hole here. I wanted to try and figure out every aspect that people could think about when drafting starting pitchers. So we have injuries, innings, yearly trends, our strategy, just the state of pitching, every possible thing that I could think of. And I'm sure I probably still left some stuff out. And then we'll get to the top 12-ish starting pitchers and ADP. Again, we're doing 3 pitching previews, starting pitcher previews. So we have some time to get to all those names. Starting pitching is unequivocally the most polarizing part of current baseball and fantasy baseball. So we are doing that deep dive on the state of pitching before we get into any player analysis, as I mentioned. And let's start with injuries. MLB released a report this offseason highlighting injuries to pitchers. No surprise, the general theme was that pitchers chasing max effort velocity and stuff is driving this increase in injuries. The average four-seam fastballs have jumped from 91.3 miles per hour back in 2008 up to 94.2 miles per hour in 2024. Last season, Major League pitchers collectively spent over 32,000 days on the IL. That is the most in MLB history. And interestingly enough, most injuries are now happening before the start or at the very start of the season. So sometime between spring training and the first couple of weeks of the season is when we actually get the most IL placements.
And it's like a dagger in the heart. I remember Shane Bieber, Yuri Perez, and Spencer Strider in quick succession last year.
And to be clear, this is true not just of pitchers. This is true of all baseball players, hitters and pitchers. It's true in football. It's true in basketball. Every sport. I don't know hockey that well, but I assume it's also true there. The first month or so of the season is when by far the most injuries happen, which makes sense. Guys are going from not playing to playing a bunch. That's when injuries are most likely to happen. So it's not just a pitcher thing at the start of or before the season where injuries happen. That's just an injuries thing.
Yes, that's an injuries thing, but the point remains that pitcher injuries are up a ton and over the
pitcher injuries happen more often, so they happen more often in April and March.
Yes. Yeah, that is your reminder, by the way, to schedule your fantasy draft as close to opening day as humanly possible, which
I mean,
this year is March 27th. So
with those 3 high-profile cases last year, it wouldn't have mattered because
Strider was what the 7th day of the 8th. I think it was a Friday.
It was like they were all
Friday
within like their first 2 starts, I think.
Yeah,
but
and
it was. Yeah, I remember writing an article about it where I was basically just whining, commiserating. Let's use that word.
We're gonna have someone next week out for the season. Like that's just
good chance.
Evan Phillips.
We get a lot of injury news when players report for spring training.
Yeah. I actually think I just saw Trevor McGill has some kind of undisclosed injury and he's delayed at the start of spring training. So there you go. Hopefully it's not that serious. But without giving away your full-on strategy here, Scott, because we'll talk about that more later, how have pitcher injuries affected your strategy, if at all, with the rise in the game?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. And it's happened so gradually, I don't even think about it as a conscious change. But one of the things I'm sure listeners out there have heard me harp on is I don't trust in this era of max effort pitching. I don't just assume that anybody can take on a big ace workload until they've proven that they can take on a big ace workload, which, okay, if they've piled up 180 plus innings for a few years in a row, you could argue that raises their injury risk too. I understand it's a double-edged sword there, but I'd rather know that it's within their capabilities, because some people's arms just can't hold up to that. And so it comes into play this year with Paul Skenes, and why, look, I don't want to draft a pitcher in the first 2 rounds anyway, but why I have Zack Wheeler ranked ahead of Paul Skenes. Paul Skenes was the hardest throwing starting pitcher in baseball last year, and he got to 160 innings.
Mm-hmm.
So I know he can do that much. Can he get and exceed 180 innings like I would want a first or second round pitcher to do? Probably, but is probably enough for me to invest that much in him? I would hesitate. And again, I'm probably not taking a pitcher that early anyway.
I think of it as a filter. It's not like, I get that like more innings means more wear on your arm, but it also means you have shown that that your arm can handle that. Like Scott said. And so there are some pitchers who are just going to get filtered out at every stage of the process. And Paul Skenes is relatively far through the filter, right? Like college pitchers are used, they only pitch once a week, but their per game usage tends to be pretty nuts. Paul Skenes, I don't think, was throwing like Quinn Matthews numbers in college where he was throwing like 140, 150 innings, but he was probably going 100 plus pitches more often than he does as a pro. And so I think Skenes has relatively few questions. It's just, until you've shown you can do it, you can't just assume they can.
And he's a big, strong guy. He has a deep arsenal, so he doesn't have to rely on the fastball so much. As pitchers who haven't thrown 180 plus innings go, I'm more confident in Skenes than most. Another example who's not going quite as high, but pretty high, is Garrett Crochet, who has pretty clear injury history.
Yeah, see, that's one I'm just not at all sure can throw 160 innings.
He has probably top 3 upside at the position, and he's going in the top 10, and I'm fine taking him in the top 10, but it's not. I wonder if people are giving the innings question enough credit for him with him.
Yeah, Garrett Crochet, I think he threw as many innings last season as he had in like every season combined since 2019. Look, we can talk more about 153 from 2019 through 2023. That's 5 seasons where he threw 150 combined innings. So it's a much bigger question mark.
And that's even with the White Sox slowing him way down in the second half. To kind of consider some other angles here as far as the pitching injuries go. If you look at a roster resource right now, every team's lineup page on roster resource, like half of them will show a 6-man rotation. I actually pinged Jason Martinez, who runs roster resource. I pinged him about this, and he said it wasn't so much that he expects them to have a 6-man rotation as it's not clear who their top 5 are. But, and he pointed this out too, what has become common in this era of max effort pitching is you get a team playing 7 games in a row, 6 games in a row, no off day interrupting it there. They will likely, almost certainly, insert a 6th starter for those stretches in the season. So, normally it was kind of standard practice in fantasy. A team has a 7-game week. Okay, they're going to have 2 2-star pitchers. And as somebody who made out 2-star pitcher rankings all last year, I found not nearly as many made 2 starts as it seems like it was going to, because they would insert a 6th starter.
Just think about the Braves, who never really had a 6-man rotation last year, but they found a way to have Chris Sale and Reynaldo Lopez almost never make starts on 4 days rest. So that is more normal than not these days, I would say. It's not like, then you have the Dodgers, who are going to have a true 6-man rotation and are probably just going to keep everyone on an every 6th day or every 6th turn schedule. Maybe they skip some guys and Blake Snell pitches on, 4 days rest every once in a while. But for the most part, that's not going to be, we'll just throw a guy in there. It's going to be, we have 6 starters and they're going to pitch every 6 games. teams.
Yes, I was going to bring up the Dodgers because I feel like they're taking it to another level, as is their wont to do with as many resources as they have. Of course, they have a lot of high-profile pitchers. All of them have health concerns. Blake Snell, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Tyler Glasnow, Shohei Ohtani. But they have like 11 or 12 pitchers that we expect to make starts for them at some point. So they're probably going to be on a regular 6-man rotation. Them and a few other teams have been mentioned as possibilities. The Mets. And I think there's a third one that are probably just going to be on a 6-man rotation all the time. But the Dodgers, Roki Sasaki obviously has health concerns also. They're going to be on the 6-man rotation, and they're probably just going to, teams do a lot of this health tracking kind of stuff now. I don't remember what the precise term is for it, but where they kind of like monitor their biometrics and determine how likely they are to have an injury. And I imagine with this much pitching surplus and the health history of those pitchers and the fact they're a shoo-in for the playoffs and really just want their guys healthy, then we're going to see a lot of Dodgers pitchers get shut down and have their innings curtailed in a more significant way this year, which diminishes the stock of all of them in my mind. I wasn't happy to see Roki Sasaki go there for that reason. I've been a little more hesitant to draft Blake Snell since he wound up there, to be honest. I think he's probably going to be as regular as any Dodgers pitcher, but I'm still not sure how regular it's going to be.
Blake Snell, the workhorse, potentially, according to Ken Rosenthal.
That was the most nothing article I've ever. Like, I know that the standard for like the soft focus feature on the first day of spring training is really low, but there was literally nothing to the Blake Snell workhorse article. It was literally just him going like, yeah, I'd like to make quality starts.
Yeah.
That was the extent. It was Blake Snell is not a workhorse. I'm sorry. Anyway, I have one more thought on injuries.
Go for it.
We don't know what can keep pitchers healthy. If any of the three of us had any idea, I promise you we would be making high 6 figures at minimum, working probably for the Dodgers because they really need that answer. We have guesses. We have smart people who have done research, and like, is the big innings increase from one year to the next a red flag? Research suggests maybe, but probably not a huge one. The biggest and best predictor of future injury is always going to be past injuries. If you have not shown you can stay healthy, you're probably not a good bet to stay healthy. But Zack Wheeler, he was the poster child for a guy who couldn't stay healthy, and now he's probably the preeminent workhorse in baseball. So,
and Gerrit Cole was the complete opposite. Yeah.
It's all guessing. To a certain extent, we're all guessing, and I think there is something to the idea that if we don't know, just assume everyone has significant injury risk. I think some people take that too far, but I think there's some logic to it. Velocity certainly seems to be a big part of it. And also how often a pitcher pitches at their peak velocity. There was a really interesting Justin Verlander quote, I think last year, maybe the year before, where he talked about, and there was a graphic where he talked about how his average fastball velocity has stayed pretty steady throughout his career, but he has had to really chase it throughout his career. So when he was 27 and he was averaging 95, 96, he could max out at 101, right? Now, not now, 2023, when Justin Verlander was good, it was like he can still average 95. He's maxing out at 97, and he's pushing the RPMs all the way up every time he throws. And that seems to be a big correlation to it. There also does just seem to be like every pitch type, but especially breaking balls, if you throw them harder, they seem to lead to more injuries. Here's the problem. It's better to throw the ball harder. And so when you say, I'm just not going to draft anyone anyone in the top 10 in velocity, I'm not going to draft. It's like, well, okay, right. Like, you got to draft someone good, right? Like these guys do break down, but pitchers break down. It's an unnatural. Our arms did not evolve to throw the way we throw a baseball. You think of human evolution. We were throwing like spears and chasing animals. That's a football motion. A baseball motion is much more difficult on your arm, on your shoulder, and on your elbow. That's why Tommy John surgery is a much lesser problem among football players than it is baseball players. So it's just, to a certain extent, it's unknowable. But I do suggest avoiding the most. I'm not avoiding Garrett Crochet.
Yeah.
I'm not taking Garrett Crochet as the number 5 SP, which is where he's going right now. Like that, that to me is just like what we can know says that is like a terrible decision.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think he has top 3 upside, but Corbin Burnes, Logan Gilbert, they are aces. Like they don't have quite as much upside, but I feel more confident given their history that they're going to deliver the volume I expect, and it'll be ace results. So that's why I rank them ahead of Crochet. I will also say, to your point about, we don't really know where the injuries are going to happen. We just know all pitchers are susceptible to injuries.
I mean, probably the elbow.
That's why I have a hard time bringing this back to fantasy strategy. I see what you did there. That's why I have a hard time getting on board with like the pocket aces strategy or the put it all on one high end arm strategy. I understand they're less risky, but they're still risky, and I would rather spread the risk among several pitchers, if particularly in a shallower league where you can come about that volume without sacrificing too much hitting.
All right, let's take a quick break. Before we do that, just a programming update. We will not be live on Thursday night. There's no mailbag that's coming out tomorrow. Players we love on Valentine's Day. We'll actually record that during the day. That'll drop on Friday, so keep a lookout for that. And thanks everyone for watching us live right now. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Baby, we are gonna start a fire.
From world-renowned clubs
Simply devastating.
to worldwide stars,
Wrexham have done it. This incredible ride continues.
the English Football League on CBS Sports Network, and stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball Today, starting pitcher preview part 1. I know we've already spent 17 minutes on injuries here. I do have a few other things I just want to quickly ask, and more so pertaining to pitchers returning from injury, right? Like if there are more elbow injuries happening, there are more players in the pool that are returning from those injuries, returning from surgeries, especially a second surgery. You know, sometimes it's a second Tommy John or just a second elbow surgery, not really telling us what it is, but Jacob deGrom is coming back from his second TJ. Shane McClanahan coming back from his second TJ. Spencer Strider coming back from an internal brace surgery, expected back late April. Shohei Ohtani had Tommy John back in 2018. He had in the elbow in surgery in September of 2023.
It sounds like it was an internal brace, yeah.
And Sandy Alcantara had TJ in October of 2023. So how do you approach these players? Is it just an avoid? I mean, obviously it'll be like cost, but
I don't think I can give like this overarching philosophy. I think it's really a case by case basis. I've gotten burned by it before. I've gotten great values by investing in the pitcher coming back from injury before. So you just have to consider the risk, consider the reward, consider the cost, and take your best shot. Jacob deGrom, it seems like he's getting he's going what is a top 60 pick basically everywhere, top 50 in NFBC. Like there's almost no accounting for the injury risk when he might be the biggest injury risk of all, given that he hasn't even thrown 100 innings in 5 years. And I think him going max effort with his fastball has contributed to that. So plenty of reward there, but I think the risk is too high at the cost. Spencer Strider, on the other hand, it's risky. Of course, he missed all of last season with elbow surgery, and he will miss at least most of April. But he's about the 125th player off the board after being the top pitcher off the board last year, and may lead the majors in strikeouts from the point he returns. So I tend to think the reward is worth the risk in that case, at least, maybe not in a 15-teamer, but certainly in like a 12-teamer.
The one thing with Strider, this is the one that we just really don't know. Like I think initially we reacted to him not having his UCL reconstructed in a typical Tommy John surgery as a good sign, that it wasn't fully torn. There was just less damage than they thought, and they did the internal brace procedure. The problem is we just don't have much of a sample size at all of pitchers coming back from the internal brace procedure. So we're still kind of on the frontier here in terms of what it means for their production, what it means for their ability to stay healthy. I'm hopeful. And at the price, I agree, he's probably worth the risk. It's just, we just don't have any kind of robust sample size to say pitchers come back X percent of the time and they come back, X percent as good as they were before. It just, it's a really small sample size of guys.
I understand what you're saying. I think that sample size has been pretty successful, but I understand what you're saying. What I understand about Strider's situation specifically is it was more of a preventative measure. It wasn't to repair damage. It was this bone spur kind of stretched out the ligament a little, and they just want to do this bracing procedure to give it extra protection. And that makes me feel pretty sanguine about it, to break out that word. As sanguine as I can be, anyway, for a pitcher coming back from a year-long elbow injury.
I think it's probably a similar answer to everything you guys just laid out, but we also have other pitchers that dealt with arm injuries in the past year who are not returning from surgery, right? So I think with these guys, it's probably, you don't want too many of them on the same team just because, they just had an elbow or forearm or shoulder injury in the past year. But some names that I'll throw out there, all of these going in the top 40 starting pitchers in ADP. Gerrit Cole last year with an elbow, Yamamoto with a shoulder, Max Fried with a forearm, Hunter Green with an elbow, Tyler Glasnow with an elbow, Grayson Rodriguez shoulder, Sonny Gray forearm, Joe Ryan shoulder, Justin Steele elbow, Kodai Senga shoulder. And that's only inside of the top 40 starting pitchers. And then everyone else who might be returning from surgery, like DeGrom and Strider. I didn't even mention those guys. So I don't know if you have, Chris, has your approach changed from those players compared to like guys returning from surgery, or just don't draft too many of them?
I think it also depends on the guys. Like Gerrit Cole's 34, and he's basically still being drafted as a top 12 starting pitcher. That feels a lot riskier than a 26-year-old Yoshinobu Yamamoto who, as far as I know, had never really had any kind of shoulder injury. So even that, like I compare Yamamoto to Kodai Senga, who came back in June or July, like late July, from his shoulder surgery or shoulder injury. That wasn't the issue. He had that calf injury, but it's still, he had a history of shoulder issues in Japan. He missed time his last few years there as well. So I'm more concerned about that. I think it's just the history, right? Like if you've had one injury in your past, I think it's okay to not write it off entirely, but to give a benefit of the doubt. But like Hunter Green, that's a Tommy John guy who missed time with a forearm or an elbow strain last year. And I think he's missed time with a shoulder injury in his major league career as well. So that one feels a little bit like a ticking time bomb. And then you've got like Max Fried, who pitches deep into games, has only missed more than 5 starts once in the past 6 seasons. But he's had forearm issues multiple times in that stretch. He's had multiple hamstring injuries. I don't worry too much about that, but the forearm stuff, it's worrisome. Like he keeps getting up off the mat. How many times can he do that though? That's I think it depends. It's different for everyone. Like Tyler Glasnow, he's not going to stay healthy. He's just not going to give us more than 130 innings. He can be really good with those 130 innings. I think he finished close to a top 24 pitcher last year, but it's it's different for everyone. I'm more willing to give a Justin Steele or Yoshinobu Yamamoto the benefit of the doubt because they're in their prime, they're not old, and they've only had the one issue. Same with Grayson Rodriguez, but like Tyler Glasnow, Hunter Green, I pretty much expect issues for them.
Mm-hmm. You good with that, Scott? You're kind of thinking.
No,
about-
I mean, I have things I want to say, but we'll get into those players individually later. It's fine.
All right, so let's talk about innings now because, again, with all these injuries adding up and velocity and all these things happening, correlated with that is the fact that innings have come down. So 175 is basically the new 200. If you take a look at the past 3 years, starting in 2022, 8 pitchers with 200-plus innings, 35 with 175. In 23, it was 5 with 200, 31 with 175, and this past season, 4 with 200, 32 with 175. So pretty consistent, obviously trending down the past couple of years. Just to put that in perspective, 10 years ago in 2015, there were 28 pitchers with 200-plus innings. So 28 with 200-plus versus 32 with 175 this past season. Again, 175 is the new 200. Scott, all that said, quality innings in bulk are harder to come by. Is it a priority for your SP1 and or your SP2 to be a proven workhorse, someone that has given you those big innings before?
It is a priority. Like I said, I'm ranking Zack Wheeler ahead of Paul Skenes for that reason. I'm ranking Corbin Burnes ahead of Garrett Crochet for that reason. I don't think it's the top priority. The top priorities, I want them to be good at getting strikeouts. I want them to be good at limiting base runners, have a good whip. Those are stats that you really need from your early round pitchers, certainly in a categories league, a standard roto league, because it's much harder. You know, we talk about how hard batting average is to get later in drafts among hitters. Well, strikeouts, whip, that's harder to get among pitchers in a roto league. So that, especially since there's a element of randomness, I don't know if that's the best word to use, but unpredictability with who gets injured and when. I wouldn't say that the workload issue is the number one issue. There are certain pitchers who we know can be dominant on a per inning basis that we also know just aren't going to give you 6 innings at a time. And those are kind of out of the ace conversation. I think I think we're better. We've gotten better about ranking them in recent years. So we just know not to consider them aces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they're not even really in the conversation at this point.
Chris, you brought up innings jumps earlier on, and I think that's a pretty big theme, at least early on in the starting pitcher pool. We have, I mean, the Cy Young from last year, Tarik Skubal, he went from 95 to 211 innings. That's a 122% increase. Garrett Crochet, almost a 500% increase in year-over-year innings. Cole Ragans, 58%. Michael King, 78%. Spencer Schwellenbach, 160%. These are 5 pitchers going inside the top 25 in ADP. They're all really talented, but does something like this maybe scare you off of them in fantasy this year?
There's no one right answer to this. I'm a little less scared of a Tarik Skubal than I am a Garrett Crochet, just because last year wasn't the first time that Tarik Skubal stayed healthy for a full season. Like, he had done that before. He did it in 2021 when he made 31 appearances, 29 starts, only 149 innings, but he didn't get hurt. 2019, he made 24 starts, 122 innings at the minor league level. I don't know, but that sounds like pretty much a full season at the minor league level. So that's another one that I'm pretty willing to give him that. So, like, his was the one injury in 2022, not downplaying it, not saying it doesn't matter, but outside of that one, he has mostly managed to stay pretty healthy. Garrett Crochet has just never been able to do it. Last year was the first time, and he had a half season where he wasn't really pitching at full strength or full go. So it depends. I would say Skubal, he's my number one pitcher, so obviously I'm less concerned about him. I think it's less of an unknown for him than the other guys. But, like, Michael King did it last year, right? 185 innings. That's a lot more than what we're talking about from Crochet. It's more than what we're talking about from Schwellenbach. So I think it comes down to, if I was ranking them by how likely they are to throw 180 innings, I would probably rank them by how close they got last year.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at yearly statistical trends, and taking a look at the past 4 years, league-wide starting pitcher ERA has kind of alternated. So 2021, it was 4.34. Home run rate was up that year. It was our first full season back from the COVID shortened season. 2022, 4.05. It was a huge drop. In hindsight, it looks like maybe the baseball might have been deadened. Home run rate was way down in 2022. In 23, 4.45 ERA. The first season with the new rules in effect, promoting more offense, steals, etc., plus home run rate bounced back up. And then in 2024, last season, a 4.15 ERA. So back down again. Home run rate, BABIP, batting average, they all came down. They were closer to 2022. Scott, obviously we cannot predict the future. We don't know what 2025 holds. But do you have a takeaway from the past 4 years that with ERA kind of bouncing up and down and home run rate kind of bouncing around as well? Is there any takeaway? I mean, the answer could just be no. But is there anything that you use from the past 4 years to kind of project forward into 25?
I mean, the only thing I would say is don't tailor your whole approach to how the ball played the previous year, because I think it's going to continue to fluctuate. 2022 and 2024 were the 2 hardest, the 2 years in the last 9 where it was hardest to hit a home run, 2022 and 2024. And then right in the middle there, 2023, plenty of home runs were being hit. So and it may have always been this way. I know people get pretty conspiratorial minded when the subject comes up. I don't know, maybe there's a conspiracy, but what the research has shown is that tiny, almost imperceptible changes in seam height can make a huge difference in how the ball travels, and it's all within the allowable range. And these balls are all manufactured by hand, so there's a human element applied for every single one. And I just wonder if there's this collective neurosis just because we know that now, and maybe it was always the case. So I'm moving forward. I'm going to try not to fixate on it so much. Maybe paying some attention to how it's playing in the moment. But even then, I mean, we've seen shifts within a season. So it's probably better just not to get hung up on it.
All right. Well, given everything that we've talked about, I feel like we've covered a lot of bases so far. Let's just talk about our general starting pitcher strategy for the upcoming season. Chris, you wrote a very detailed article a couple of weeks back highlighting the starting pitcher dead zone in fantasy baseball drafts. Explain to the people what that is and how it might shape your strategy this season.
Yeah, so I've done this research in the past, and I updated it here. I went through the last 10 years of drafting, taking out 2020. The further we get from 2020, the better, because I can just remove it from any data that I look at. It just doesn't tell us anything. So I looked at the past 10 years minus 2020, looked at pitchers who were drafted in each round range, what they returned based on, I use the Fangraphs auction calculator, but it's going to be the same whether, whatever version of it you use. And what I found was, unsurprisingly, pitchers drafted in the first round are better than pitchers drafted in the second round. Pitchers drafted in the second round, better than pitchers drafted in the third round. The interesting thing, though, is once you get to the fourth round, over the past 10 years, there has basically been no difference in quality between pitchers in the fourth round and pitchers in the 10th round, which is surprising because you would think it would be a fairly linear drop-off, and that's not what you see. So what that means, of the pitchers in the first round over the last decade, 50% of them were worth at least $20 that year. In the second round, it was at least like 42% were worth at least $20. Third round, about 22%, pretty big drop-off. Fourth round, 11%. Fifth round, around 12%. Sixth round, around 12%. Seventh round, around 10%. And it's really flat starting in the 4th to 10th round. And that's why I call it the SP dead zone, because this is a theory that has been talked about a lot on the football side. It hasn't quite made it over to baseball, but I think it's very similar things at play with SP and RB. They're very fungible. They're very volatile. They get hurt, and they are more dependent on their context than the other players you're drafting. Better team, more wins, better ballpark, better defense, all that stuff. There's stuff outside of their control. And what I think happens is that the pitchers we know can give us 180 innings of ace level production go in the first 3 rounds. After that is when we start to push guys up. That's when we're like, yeah, but think about how good Garrett Crochet can be. And like, yeah, Garrett Crochet could be good. Historically, there's probably a pretty low chance that it's actually going to work. And so the way to put this in action for me is you got 2 options, I think. I think you should take an anchor ace. I think that's a Zack Wheeler, even if it's like a Framber Valdez, one of those like projectable innings eater types. Maybe there are other sexier options with more strikeouts and more projectability, but like having Crochet. That anchor, like Crochet, those are the guys we talk ourselves into. And then you should just walk away from the starting pitcher pool until the 8th, 9th, 10th round, and then you jump back in, because what the data suggests, and if you want to look at the median or the average return on investment for starting pitchers in that range, it's also the same. The data all suggests that once you get to around the 4th round, they just aren't good investments. And so that's the way I think. And this has proven fairly, because I think the first time I did this analysis was in 2021, which was a very different offensive environment. And yet it has remained very consistent. And so I think you either take that ace and then you don't take another pitcher until like the 7th, 8th, 9th rounds, or you don't take an ace at all and you really load up starting in the 7th, 8th, 9th rounds. And that's where it's not that you shouldn't draft pitchers early on. It's just you got to know when the pitchers are historically the right values. And look, every year is different. This year could be the one that's different, right? Jacob deGrom in the 4th round could throw 170 innings and be the best pitcher in baseball. But I think a data-driven approach will suggest that a stars and scrubs, or a whatever you want to call it, hero SP is the term I've used, is the most efficient way to draft pitchers. And this is all for 12-team leagues, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the other side of the coin is that there's also a drop-off happening within the hitter ranks. And to me, it's clearer to see from the individuals involved. Hitters are more predictable overall, and you can see when the studs run out, and you're either settling for second-tier options among the hitter positions, or you're shooting for the moon with a Lawrence Butler type. So I think that right now, the current state of pitching, and I talked about it throughout the offseason, deeper than I can ever remember being, deeper in what I consider to be legitimate talent, guys who can actually miss bats, guys who are going to be good, even if it's a more hitter-friendly environment. It's not like there was just a bunch of low ERA guys who you could see getting squished if balls started sailing out of the park more. The way I've put it is 15 to 50 practically. Those aren't exact numbers, but 15 to 50 in my starting pitcher rankings. I have a really hard time putting them in an order I feel confident in. And so last year I was talking about the glob, this kind of mass of pitchers who just weren't very exciting, and they made up so much of the position. Now it's like a good glob of genuinely exciting pitchers that I really want to take advantage of. And so I am finding that the more I draft, the longer I'm waiting, really. At least 4 rounds. That's the bare minimum that I want to just stick with hitters and then hit pitchers pretty hard after that. But sometimes it is more like round 7, round 8 even when I take my first pitcher. And obviously I have to hit pitcher even harder at that point once I do take them. But it's rare that I come out of a draft saying, oh, I didn't get enough pitching. And again, these are pitchers I legitimately feel good about. I actually think the talent is there for them to potentially deliver high-end results and certainly to remain a critical part of my team all season. So that's my approach. I guess there's a little bit of overlap there with Chris and my approach. It's just I'm less likely to take a pitcher in the first 3 rounds probably. But the idea of waiting in general, and potentially even longer than I would feel comfortable recommending, just like you're taking your first pitcher in round 8. That seems crazy. But yeah, I think it's a viable option this year.
For what it's worth, I think the player pool is different every year. And so what happened from 2015 to 2024 will not necessarily be the same thing that happens in 2025. And what we've seen on the football side is people have gotten smarter about how they draft running backs. And so those guys who used to get pushed up into the RB dead zone in the 4th round don't anymore. And so what you've seen is that the RB dead zone has kind of gone away. And maybe we're seeing a shift in baseball where there's a flatter landscape and it's okay to wait. But
I mean, who were the top 2 pitchers drafted last year? Gerrit Cole and Spencer Strider.
Yeah. I mean, they got, that was not great. But over the 10 years we're talking about, hitters drafted in the first 8 rounds, each of the first 8 rounds on average return an average of $10 in value, are worth $10 the following year. That is only true for the first 3 rounds at pitcher.
Yeah.
So part of that is hitters can contribute in 5 categories. Pitchers can't. Part of that is there are more hitters, but the smallest gap between the average hitter and average pitcher is in those first 2 rounds historically. The hitters are still better. They're still, the average hitter in the first round is like a $27 player. The average pitcher is around a $23 player. But that gap gets way bigger once you get to the 4th round, especially, and then stays pretty big for the next 6 rounds. So there are a lot of different ways you can approach it. I've found a lot of success with my pitching staff with this approach. So that's what I'll say.
By the way, and this isn't meant as a counter to you at all, but just in those instances where I've waited to like round 8 to take a pitcher in a 12-team league, I'm talking about, that pitcher was like Max Fried.
Well, that
Webb.
also,
it wasn't. It was a pitcher that we've mostly regarded as an ace or a borderline ace over the years. That's how much depth there is at starting pitcher. That's the caliber you can get that late in the draft.
Just fill in the blank. Give me some numbers here. I want blank of my top blank starting pitchers. For me, it's if I can get 4 of my top 40, I think I feel pretty good with that, which kind of ends with like Jack Flaherty and like Hunter Green and some other guy like it. But that range of the rankings, 4 of my top 40 is what I want.
4 of your top 40. Okay.
Yeah, it's like probably 2 of my top 20. And then also like 2 of my top 30. And then maybe 2 of my top 35. And then like 4 of my top 40.
So you really like that 36 to 40 range.
That's really where I don't even know who's in that range, but that's the range.
I'm going to say 6 of my top 50.
All right. Fair enough. You have waited long enough. Let's talk about some individual players. But first, we'll take a quick break, but we'll do that right after this.
We dig it. Do you? The Pro Volleyball Federation on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball Today, starting pitcher preview part 1. We are diving into ADP. We're using Fantasy Pros average draft position minus ESPN, and we are using CBS position eligibility. Up first, your SP1 is Paul Skenes with an ADP of 12.8, the number 1 overall pick in 2023, took the league by storm, 196 ERA, 0.95 whip. All of his ERA estimators were 2.71 or better. Big strikeouts, lots of ground balls, suppressed hard contact, 6 different pitches, including a huge fastball. And he was a workhorse, 6+ innings in 16 of, that should probably say 22 starts. I wrote 12, but say 22, 23, something like that.
16 out of 23, but that 23 includes the victory lap start at the end of the season where he only threw 2 innings. So 16 out of 22.
And Paul Skenes did get up to 160 innings if you combine the minors and the majors. So assuming health, I mean, I think him getting 180 plus this season is doable. It's just a big price tag here. So Scott, going ahead of Tarik Skubal and Zack Wheeler is Paul Skenes. What do you think?
I mean, I'd rather have Skubal and Wheeler, but again, I'm not drafting a pitcher in the first 2 rounds, so I'm not getting any of them in all likelihood. I suppose Wheeler, there's an outside chance I could get him, but definitely not Skubal or Skenes. I prefer Skubal, but the longer this goes on, the less convicted I am about that. I totally get Skenes going number 1. He still got to 160 innings last year. You mentioned how much Skubal's innings total went up from 2023 to 2024, and you actually understated it because you didn't include the postseason. Tigers were in the postseason. So Skubal went from having 85 innings in 2023 to 211 in 2024. So, he got the big workload last year, but we haven't seen that he can repeat the big workload. So there are durability concerns there for him as well. I think if we're just assessing starting pitchers on upside and kind of leaving out the already injured guys like DeGrom and Strider, it's Skubal, it's Skenes, and it's Garrett Crochet. And, so I really, other than Crochet, I wouldn't have a problem taking any of those 3 number 1.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with like the talent. I think Paul Skenes is uber talented. That's not the question here. It's just at his high velocity, can he maintain this over a full season? And just, I think my drafting strategy is kind of a lot like Scott's, where the first 3, 4, 5 rounds, I'm really looking to take hitters. So it's just, I don't think I'm going to have the opportunity to take Paul Skenes, but it's not like a talent thing with him.
I'll also just point out, like, the Pirates won 10 fewer games than the Tigers and 19 fewer games than the Phillies. Wins matter. As much as they are annoying and random, your chances of winning a game are better on a better team. And Paul Skenes is clearly on the worst team of these 3. And the Pirates have done literally nothing to improve their team this offseason. I think the best player they signed is Adam Frazier.
They traded for Spencer Horwitz, and he's out for 6 weeks or something.
Don't get me started. We got a lot to talk about, but the Pirates are stupid, and I hate the way they've approached this offseason. But like, this is probably going to be, absent Paul Skenes, a not very good team. And even with Skenes, they're trending towards average at best. And so that's, if you think, I think it's pretty close to a tiebreaker between these 3. I agree with Scott. The more the offseason has gone on, the closer the 3 have gotten in my rankings, to the point where just today I made it 21, 22, 23. Skubal, Wheeler, Skenes. That is, I am not going to express a strong desire for any of the 3 over the other. I'm much more likely to draft Wheeler because he goes later than the other 2, but I have no problem if you want any one of those 3 at the top. It's just nobody seems to want Zack Wheeler at the top, which I think is kind of dumb.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about Tarik Skubal, the reigning, defending, undisputed AL Cy Young Award winner, ADP of 14 here. He finished as the SP1 in fantasy last year, returned $37 in 12-team roto leagues, a 2.39 ERA, 0.92 whip, the most strikeouts in baseball, incredible walk rate 2 years in a row. He was a legit workhorse, 6+ innings in 25 of 31 starts. The only potential red flags I see here, the velocity jumped up 1 mile per hour year over year, and the innings jump, which we already mentioned, going from 95 all the way up to 211 innings is a pretty big jump. The ADP here, Chris, is at 14. When you said 21, that was in your overall rankings, right?
Yes.
That means in most drafts, based on ADP, you probably won't get Skubal, right?
I'm kind of pushing myself out of the Skubal and Skenes range, and it's basically just means I'm going to draft a lot of Zack Wheeler this year, and I'm totally fine with that, but we'll talk about that in about a minute and a half. Would you guys like a fun fact about Tarik Skubal?
No.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, Frank, you get a fun fact. Scott, I'm going to remove you from the stream.
Okay.
If Tarik Skubal allowed 1 fewer run and 7 fewer hits last season, he would have led the majors in wins, strikeouts, ERA, and WHIP. That is how close he was to pulling that off. Okay, Scott, you're allowed back.
What did I miss?
Nothing.
Yeah, you'll never know.
Okay.
He was absurdly dominant. The idea that like there is a significant gap in talent or projected production between Tarik Skubal and Paul Skenes, I think is a little silly. If you think they're just going to throw the same number of innings, then it's fine to view it as a coin flip. I mostly view it as a coin flip. I think Tarik Skubal's upside is pretty ridiculous, though. And I think the way people are drafting Paul Skenes implies that his upside is a level of ridiculous above Tarik Skubal, and I'm not sure that that's fair. Tarik Skubal is the only concern is whether his elbow can hold up.
You mentioned the control there, Frank, and I think that gets lost in just, oh yeah, he's great at missing. He's an elite control guy too.
4.6% walk rate.
Yeah. The talent for Skubal was so obvious that some people were predicting, September 2023 that he'd win the Cy Young Award next year. Some people were.
Yeah, some people. I don't know anyone on this podcast who would have done that. That's kind of crazy, but for whoever did that, shout out to you, man. You got it right. Let's talk about Zack Wheeler. There seems to be a consensus top 3 starting pitchers this season. We've already kind of alluded to it, but that top 3 is rounded out by Zack Wheeler, an ADP of 20.5. He finished as the SP2 in fantasy last year. He returned $33 worth of value, remains incredibly consistent, has had an ERA below 285 and a WHIP below 105 in 3 of the past 4 years. Reliable workhorse, only pitcher with 200+ innings 2 years in a row. He went 6+ innings in 26 of 32 starts. If I'm nitpicking on Zack Wheeler, he's turning 35 in May. His ground ball rate is trending down. He allowed a career high barrel rate. His xFIP and SIERA were almost a full run higher than his 2.57 ERA. Scott, do any of those things that I just mentioned worry you about Zack Wheeler?
Not really. I mean, yeah, you could find things to nitpick, and you said you were nitpicking. He also struck out more than 10 batters per 9 innings for the second time, so he became a better strikeout pitcher. He introduced a splitter to his arsenal that was pretty effective, kind of abandoned it in the second half. I don't know why, but like it seems like he's getting better, and yeah, he's at an age where it could end, but any pitcher, it could end any year for any pitcher, given how common innings are. And as we've already said, I'd rather bet on the guy who's shown he can handle the workload year after year, which Wheeler has. He's kind of the elder statesman at the position, with Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer and Clayton Kershaw aging out. And he just feels as reliable as it gets when you're looking for an ace.
He has an ERA below 3 in 4 of the past 5 seasons. And he has at least as many innings in 4 of the past 6 seasons as Tarik Skubal's career high. And he's viewed as the boring option among the aces. I think Zack Wheeler is probably the best value among the aces. I think there's 240 strikeout upside. I think the ratios are going to be great. He's going to win a lot of games. I'm going to be drafting and building a lot of pitching staffs around Zack Wheeler this season.
And of the top 3 that we mentioned, Zack Wheeler and the Phillies are clearly the best team of the 3. So yes. The Tigers, the Pirates, and the Phillies. So yeah, I mean, 16 wins last year for Zack Wheeler. He should be in position to win a lot of games once again. I do want to correct something I said. I said Zack Wheeler 200+ innings 2 years in a row. It's been 190+ 2 years in a row. I was looking at his regular and postseason innings combined for the past 2 years when I brought that up. Let's continue on. We get past the top 3 and we get to Logan Gilbert with an ADP of 30. Last year finished as the SP5, returned $24 worth of value. Would have been higher if the Mariners would have helped him win more than 9 games last year. Not really Logan Gilbert's fault, unfortunately, but took a nice step forward. He tweaked the pitch mix. He lowered his fastball usage, made the slider his most used pitch last season. Splitter was downright nasty, 50% whiff rate on that pitch. And overall, Logan Gilbert's 14.9% swinging strike rate led all qualified starting pitchers, and he also led all pitchers in innings. So, Chris, I mean, when you look at those things, it's you got a bunch of innings, you get potential strikeout growth here. It's a great ballpark to pitch in. I really like the growth that we've seen from Logan Gilbert, and I think he's totally worthy of being a top 5 starting pitcher drafted.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely worthy of being a top 5 starting pitcher drafted. I agree with that. And I don't even know if there's a knock against him. It's elite control. Strikeout rate got up to 27%. The quality of contact in the past has not been that great, but the cutter, the splitter seem to help in that regard. So I don't really think there's any knock on him. Even like, I was doing some research today trying to find some evidence of Logan Gilbert ever having been hurt going back to college. And the only thing I found was he had shoulder muscle soreness for a few days 2 years ago and had to have a start pushed back like 3 days. That's the only injury I can find for Logan Gilbert. He's massive. He gets a ton of extension, which helps the stuff play up even more. I think he's kind of Zack Wheeler, just slightly less proven. But at this point, you know, we're talking 32 starts 3 years in a row. Really good park. I think the ERA is going to be a little higher. The ERA is relative to the other guys here. You know, the career best is 3.20. I think that's probably the only knock on him. But if even that, it's going to come with an elite whip, which is underrated. We haven't said that so far this podcast, but that's a big deal. Whip is the hardest thing to make up for because you can find guys
we did say that this podcast, but
we should say it again.
Go ahead. Continue the thought. Reiterate it. It's important.
We should say it again because it's important because you can find a Spencer Schwellenbach who will get a bunch of strikeouts and put up a good ERA for a run. Yeah. Those guys tend to have higher whips. It is harder to find whip help, and Logan Gilbert was the best in baseball last year. So I think he's going to be really good again.
So I don't have Logan Gilbert, a top 5 pitcher, but he's going. Actually, I think I have him 6th. I have him 6th, and he's going 4th, right? Yeah. Is that so, you know, it's quibbling, but I think the reason I have him a couple spots lower is if we do have a year where the ball is carrying better, even with him being in a good pitcher's park, his ERA could jump over 3.50 again. Right? He allows a lot of fly balls that could hurt him on the road. That's a possibility for Logan Gilbert. He went 9-12 last year, and you could look at that 2 ways. Oh, look how valuable he was even for having a 9-12 record. But part of it's like the Mariners' offense is kind of a problem, and I think the park contributes to that. But he's one of those pitchers who can have a lot of bad luck losses, even pitching deep into games. A lot of luck is tied to that, and he could have his win-loss record could be total reverse this year, 12-9. But he does have, I think, less of a chance of winning 15 plus games than some of the other pitchers we've talked about.
I think maybe only Zack Wheeler is the one. I mean, I know Skubal just obviously won a bunch of games too. Gilbert won 13 in each of 22 and 23. It feels so fluky. Like the Mariners should be a good team on paper, but you know, I wish he did more
because of their pitching.
That's the thing is it's kind of double counting. Part of why they're good is because of Logan Gilbert, you know, and so they're going to not score many runs. I think is the way to put it. And so there's probably a better way to put that, but yeah, I think I think his win potential is lower than a couple. I think it's similar to Skenes. But yeah, if you have to have a tiebreaker between him and Zack Wheeler, Wheeler's on a team I expect to win 15 more games, probably.
If we're projecting a low 2 ZRA for Skenes and a low 3 ZRA for Gilbert, I think that gives Skenes more win potential.
All right, next up, we have Corbin Burnes, who signed with the Arizona Diamondbacks this offseason, an ADP of 33.8, and I think he's a pretty interesting one for fantasy. Finished as the SP9 last season. He returned $21 of value, still delivering strong ratios over a lot of innings, but the strikeouts continue to trend down for Corbin Burnes. Over the last 4 years, K per 9 has gone from 12.6 to 10.8, 9.3, 8.4 last year. During that same stretch, swinging strike rate, 16.6%, 15.1, 12.2, and then 12.9. So it actually went back up a little bit last year, despite the overall strikeout rate coming down. The ERA estimators all say that Corbin Burnes deserved a mid to high threes ERA. That's been the case 2 years in a row. He did make some adjustments towards the end of last season. Scott, is that enough for you to buy in on Corbin Burnes as a top 5 starting pitcher?
Yes, it is. I'm buying into the explanation, and I am not really holding his reduced strikeout rate against him because the explanation makes perfect sense. What went wrong for him last year and what he did to fix it. So basically he was overthrowing, as in throwing his cutter too hard, getting too much spin on it. It wasn't cutting as much. That's his best pitch. He didn't really have his cutter last year, but he was able to make do without it for 4 months, put up close to ace numbers apart from the strikeout rate. But then it kind of caught up to him in August. He had a really rough month and he decided he needed to make more of an effort to fix that cutter. He took the spin off in September. He threw it 1.5 miles per hour, I think, slower. And he started to get more whiffs for that final month. 6 starts, 1.29 ERA, 0.94 whip. Right at a K per inning. So it wasn't like he was back to being a huge strikeout guy, but it was better. It was better, and it was clear the cutter was better. And I think he's been so reliable over the years, even with some fluctuation in the strikeouts there, that I think he's as safe of an ace as you'll find.
I'll also just point out this is an example of a time when, especially in a small sample size, K percentage is better than K per 9. Usually they tell the same story, but
right.
You said only a strikeout per inning. Well, the whip was so low in the month of September.
And I know the swinging strike rate was a lot better too.
Yeah, the swinging strike rate was better. It was like 13%, I think, but the K percentage was 27%, which is a little higher than it was in 2023, even. Not quite when he won the Cy Young. I don't think he's going to get back to that, but he has had 2 IL stints in his career. 2019, he was on the IL for 2 weeks with a shoulder injury. It's 5 years ago. And then 2020, he had an oblique injury on the left side. That doesn't worry me at all. I think Corbin Burnes is about as projectable for health as any pitcher can be. And even if the strikeout rate only gets up to 25% like it was in 2023, he's got a great lineup backing him up. It's a pretty good park, especially for limiting home runs. It's
that Diamondbacks team looks good.
Yeah, it looks like a really good team. And if he gets that strikeout rate back up to 25%, I think you're talking about 200 strikeouts. I think you're talking about as projectable 190 innings as you'll find. I think he's on probably the second best team of the pitchers we've talked about so far. They led the league in runs scored last year. So this could be a 20 game winner if everything goes right for Corbin Burnes.
And I am finding that Corbin Burnes sometimes comes at a little bit of a discount. Like, I'm usually not really thinking about starting pitcher till round 5. And sometimes Corbin Burnes is there in round 5 in a 12-team league. So of the pitchers we've talked about so far, this is the first one that I realistically have a chance to draft because some people are just kind of scared away from that strikeout rate.
His ADP in NFBC leagues is 38. That is such a good value. 15-team league, 12-team league, I don't care. If I can get him in the 3rd round in a 15-team league, that's amazing. If I can get him in the 4th, if I can get Corbin Burnes in the 4th round, then the SP dead zone starts in round 5 this year.
Look, I was going to echo the same exact things. I've noticed drafts that I've done. I did an NFBC draft early in the offseason. Corbin Burnes wasn't signed yet, but I got him in the 4th round of a 12-team league. And sometimes he does slip a little bit in those 12-teamers. So he's really the first one where if he's there in the 4th round, I might actually pivot off of hitting and go ahead and grab Corbin Burnes as my SP1. Let's move on down to just after Burnes, Chris Sale, an ADP of 35.8. So going right at that 3-4 turn. Incredible bounce back season for Sale, a 2.38 ERA, 101 whip. He was first among qualified starting pitchers in K per 9 and K minus walk rate. He led all pitchers in Fangraphs WAR, won the NL Cy Young Award. So all in all,
pitching triple crown.
Fantastic season for Chris Sale. But it's a career that has been riddled by injury, some more fluky than others, but he has dealt with some arm stuff in his career. Last season, 177 and 2/3 innings were his most since 2017. And he ended the season hurt due to back spasms. They were apparently bad enough that, he couldn't pitch in those final games that were really
he missed at least 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And critical weeks. Like the Braves barely got into the playoffs, and Sale
couldn't pitch in the playoffs.
He couldn't pitch down the stretch when they needed him. They couldn't pitch in the playoffs when they needed him. So he was in pain for sure.
Yeah. Look, his ADP has jumped 90 picks year over year. I hate to sound like a broken record. I keep saying this for every player that's risen, but it's just, to me, last year was the year to draft Chris Sale when his ADP was outside the top 120. Now you have to use a 3rd or a 4th round pick on him. It just doesn't seem like that wise of an investment. So I'm out.
I think his price is fine, more or less. I have trouble actually clicking it when the time comes. That's where I'm at. It's not really that I dislike Chris Sale. It's just that it's easy enough to see how things go wrong. Like last year was pretty much like, I don't know. There's a poker term like runner something where you get all the cards you need in a row and it works out perfectly. And like, that's what happened for Chris Sale. And he still broke down at the end. And it's like, well, it didn't happen until the end. So he only really missed like 1 start in the regular season. So it's not that big of a deal. But does that necessarily mean that this time it won't happen in June? That's the thing that we can't guarantee. It's just, among the pitchers we've talked about, I do think there is a drop-off here. Not in terms of talent, because I think the next group of pitchers are incredibly talented, but in terms of
projectability.
With everyone that we've talked about, it's like there's just a ellipsis if they stay healthy at the end. And with everyone starting now pretty much for, I don't know, like 10 picks, it's kind of if everything goes right, more so,
Yeah. Pulling an inside straight. Is that what you were?
I think that's the term. Yeah.
So I have Chris Sale as a bust for this year because I don't want to pay the price for him. I think there are pitchers with comparable upside going a round or 2 later, but sort of like Corbin Burnes, this is one that I find slips sometimes. And yeah, I don't want to pay the 3rd or 4th round price tag for Chris Sale, but if he's there in round 5, and sometimes often he is in a 12-team league, I'm almost certainly taking him. It's still true. The case I was making for Chris Sale the past couple years, and it's the same case Alex Anthopoulos made for him when the Braves traded for him, was that most of the injuries, there was the Tommy John surgery that kicked it off, but there were like freakish things that happened, a lot of times not even having to do with him playing baseball, and like broken bones and a lot of freakish things for Chris Sale that it seemed more like bad luck than bad biology, and back spasms. Yeah. The timing of it was unfortunate, but it's not like it's the sort of thing that could happen to anybody. And it's just one of those nagging injuries that is just frustrating. It's not really like a structural thing usually. So all of that still applies. It's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility he could have a healthy season again and be an ace. And is it any less likely than Garrett Crochet doing that? I mean, I don't know. And it's not, I wouldn't say there's a huge difference in how likely they are to stay healthy. So if I can get Sale in about that same range that Crochet is going, or sometimes even later, because people are so excited about Crochet's upside, then I'm willing to do it.
All right. Well, after Chris Sale, we do get to Garrett Crochet, one of the biggest breakout pitchers from last season. His ADP 37.5, so an early 4th round pick. He's a fun one to evaluate for fantasy. Among pitchers with 140 innings last season, Crochet ranked first in K per 9, first in K minus walk rate, swinging strike rate, XFIP, and Sierra. From a skills perspective, you can argue that he was already the most dominant pitcher in baseball, but there is a lot of unknown. He has a lengthy injury history. His innings jumped from 25 all the way up to 146 year over year. And we just don't know how his arm is going to respond to that. Thankfully, Crochet was traded over to the Red Sox, which is like night and day compared to, the White Sox team that he was on last year. Chris, to me, this is a big risk, big reward. I totally get why people are drafting him here. I just don't think it'll be me, unfortunately.
I'm psyching myself out. I started out the offseason pretty high on Garrett Crochet relative to the consensus. And then as the consensus has started to climb, I think I've talked myself out of it being such a good idea, just because there is just no track record here. Like, even last year, where he looked like the best pitcher in baseball on a per inning basis, that was 3 months basically. And then the last 3 months of the season just basically didn't count. Like
he didn't throw more than 4 innings in any start after July.
Like it was just completely non-competitive pitching. And I don't hold that against him that he was like that. He had a 7 ERA in the month of August, but it's also like the time in which we can look at what Garrett Crochet did and say, this is an ace level pitcher, is April, May, and June of 2024. Other than that, like, he was a highly drafted player, but he wasn't a hugely productive player in college. Part of that's not his fault. His senior, or the year he was drafted, was 2020. I think he made 1 start. He didn't pitch in the minors that year, all of that. But then he got hurt. Once he became a pro, he threw, I think the number I said earlier was 153 innings combined between 2019 and 2023. So it's sort of like Lawrence Butler. I think more emphatically, like the way Garrett Crochet pitched last year was more emphatically dominant, but it's 3 great months. And he's the number 6 pitcher, number 7 pitcher in ADP. That's just, I can certainly see how it goes right. But one, it's a big team upgrade. It's a big park downgrade too.
Yep.
If he's as dominant as he looked last year, that won't matter. Like, if he's really a 35% strikeout rate guy, then it doesn't matter where he's pitching. But
if he's Chris Sale going to Fenway, as happened, like, it won't.
But Chris Sale was a lot more proven.
Oh, for sure.
When he made that. I'm not saying that's what you were saying. It's
just, I get it. I'm surprised there haven't been more detractors for Garrett Crochet. I thought I think I initially ranked him 10th or 11th, and I thought I was being bullish on him by doing that, because I thought people would look at the fact he didn't have a 5-inning start in the second half by design. The White Sox smartly put him on ice and just preserved his trade value, because that was the most valuable thing they could do with their second half. But he didn't have a 5-inning start in the second half. His ERA jumped to 3.58 during that time, is what he finished with. And I thought people would look at that and have some questions. And, in a way, it's a credit to the way fantasy baseball evaluation has progressed, that people know to look past that kind of surface level stuff, and at the fact he had the best strikeout minus walk rate in baseball, as you mentioned, Frank. He also had the best XFIP, and Sierra among pitchers with 100 innings was just ahead of Paul Skenes in both. So, like, in many of the categories we look at closest, Crochet was number 1 or number 2. And so it's encouraging that people pay such close attention to that they're able to overlook the 3.58 ERA. And I'll add that the underlying numbers, even though the ERA kind of spiked on him the second half, he still had the dominant underlying numbers. I think just small samples, a couple innings got away from him and skewed the ERA. But when everybody else is giving him a pass for that, then it's like, well, somebody has to bring up these other points, right? So I don't want people who are just jumping in. A lot of people are just jumping in right now to fantasy baseball and listening to this podcast. This is like their cram session on starting pitchers. I've said a couple times, Garrett Crochet probably is top 3 in terms of upside at the position. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to take him as even the 5th starting pitcher off the board, I don't have a real problem with it. I'm just saying you got to be aware of the risks too, because there are some safer options you can take in that range.
It's a little like what we talked about with Ellie De La Cruz on the shortstop preview, where if you take Garrett Crochet as your ace, I do think you need to be more conscious about how you approach the rest of your pitching staff. And that means you've taken your risk already, and you've taken like the biggest risk you possibly can. So now it's time to like focus on Framber Valdez. And like when you get to, 140 or whatever it is, you're taking Seth Lugo, not
Spencer Strider.
Yeah. Like you gotta be more thoughtful about how you build the rest of your pitching staff, because it's just going to be, it's too volatile to take additional unnecessary risks.
Last point on Crochet, Scott, something you brought up about the fantasy baseball community being sharper and the ADP being where it is for Garrett Crochet. It didn't start out that way. Mm-hmm. I understand this was a small sample size, 22 drafts in the NFBC back in October. His ADP was 52. So it's just been rising throughout the offseason. Of course, getting traded away from the White Sox helps that.
At First Pitch Arizona, there was a panel about pitchers, and someone mentioned Garrett Crochet's ADP was SP13. And people like gasped in both directions. Like the room was evenly split between that's too low and oh my God, that's too high. And now it's
rising.
I think that probably depended. Like I was in the camp when I said I thought I was bullish ranking him 10th or 11th at first. I was in the camp like, okay, he's not going to be a White Sox at the start of next year. That was the whole reason why they preserved his trade value. But maybe some people weren't necessarily counting on him being traded like I was.
Yeah. All right. After Garrett Crochet, we're into the 4th round where we find Cole Ragans and Dylan Cease going right next to each other. ADP of 42.3 and 42.5, respectively. Cole Ragans. Strong first full season as a starter. He finished SP16. He returned $16.50 of value, 3.14 ERA, a 1.14 WHIP. He was top 6 in strikeout rate. All of his ERA estimators were under 350 last season. He has 3 different pitches with a whiff rate over 33%, including that nasty changeup from the left-hand side. However, he's another one. The innings have jumped from 124 all the way up to 196 with the postseason included there. And in the second half, I will point out, his walk rate went up and his velocity dropped a little bit.
Yeah.
Scott, does that worry you at all about Cole Ragans, who does have an extensive injury history?
I believe he's had 2 Tommy John surgeries, right?
I believe Nick Pollock says it's 1.5.
The second one was fixing the first one, from what I understand.
So he calls it 1.5. Yeah, there is that injury history. And yeah, I noticed the same thing, because what made Cole Ragans such an attractive breakout was the big jump in velocity. So for him to lose a couple points off that in the second half raised an eyebrow in me for sure as it was happening. But it didn't really change the production. During those 15 starts with the diminished velocity, Cole Ragans had a 3.26 ERA, 1.13 WHIP, 10.5 K per 9. So it's a concern, but it's not a big enough to concern that it changes the way I draft him. And this was another big win for me last year in the prognostication department. I think I ended up with only 1 share of Cole Ragans because I talked him up so much. People who were drafting against me kind of, they wanted to do that vindictive thing where they took him just so I couldn't take him. Like if I could always get him at his ADP, I would have had him in every league, but it only worked out once for me to do that.
I'm pretty sure he had a big spring too that caused the ADP to rise.
Yeah, that's probably true. But hopefully all of you out there got to enjoy Cole Ragans last year, and I do view him as a true ace going into this year.
Are you guys okay just paying the price, 42.3 mid 4th round on Cole Ragans?
I mean, I'm probably not taking a pitcher in round 4. If he happens to fall into round 5, I'll probably take him.
Okay.
I have him higher in the SP rankings, but right there in my overall.
All right, let's talk about Dylan Cease, who finished SP 11. He returned $20 of value. Very strong first season with the Padres, and it might be his last. More on that, I guess, throughout the next coming days. 3.47 ERA, 107 WHIP, 224 strikeouts were tied for third most in baseball for Dylan Cease. How did he do it? He lowered the walks. He increased the velocity on his fastball last season. I don't know why, but Cease just doesn't feel like a fantasy ace. Maybe it's just the inconsistency we've got from him over the years, where it's like one really strong year, one really bad year, one amazing year 3 years ago, and then like he was just kind of mediocre before that. He also could get traded, kind of alluded to that. But Chris, do you find yourself targeting Dylan Cease here in this similar range, 4th round, right next to Cole Ragans?
Yeah, when I saw the Padres sign Nick Pivetta, my initial thought, I was at a concert and I texted you guys immediately when I saw it, and my initial thought was basically like, get ready to learn Boston, buddy. Like that, he's going to get traded to the Red Sox or the Mets or somewhere, either him or Michael King, one of them. It doesn't really matter. It'd be a park downgrade, but probably a lineup upgrade around him. I generally think the move with Dylan Cease is draft him coming off the bad year and fade him coming off the good year. And this is a relative good year. So that's more or less where I'm at. I rank him around here, but it's in the range of the draft where I don't really want to take a starting pitcher. And you can see why with a guy like Dylan Cease, who, to be fair, never misses a start. Literally has not missed a start at least since 2019.
Yeah. I mean, there might be some discomfort in the ERA and WHIP department, depending how things play out for him. But you can pencil him in for 220 strikeouts. He
doesn't go deep into games very consistently. I believe over the past 4 years, it's sub 50%, going at least 6 innings. So like that's how you get 33 starts per year, basically. And he's never hit even 190 innings.
Yeah.
But the strikeouts are great. The WHIP, we'll see.
You probably compare him with a George Kirby.
He did have a career best walk rate last year. He did have a career best walk rate. He got that WHIP to 1. But it did get
much worse in the second half. He wasn't able to sustain that. It was really good the first half of the season and then was more typical. So I think he's fine here if that's the route you want to go. It's just not a route I'm going to go with. And Frank, like you said, I think Cease is a guy that you probably, if it's not George Kirby, it's Joe Ryan or Bailey Ober or Shota Imanaga. But the problem there, and this is the problem with Dylan Cease, is the WHIP specialists that you can get later to help insulate that have real ERA risk. Dylan Cease also has real ERA risk. So you are potentially drafting Shota Imanaga and Dylan Cease with 2 of your first 8 picks. A lot of strikeouts. WHIP should balance out. They might both be 4 ERA guys. And it wouldn't be like that shocking if both of those guys had a 4 ERA.
What about in a points league where Dylan Cease's strikeouts are going to be less valuable in a points league?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that his starts sometimes run short of 6 innings is going to be a bigger problem in a points league.
Yeah. I think he gets downgraded a little bit. Yeah. Like someone like Framber Valdez, I probably would just take over Cease in a points league straight up.
Yeah, I don't know that I would. I mean, Cease did end up with more innings than him last year.
I think Framber had a IL stint, but he's been pretty durable outside of that.
I'm trying to remember. I don't have my document here with the point per game production, but maybe I can find it real quickly. Valdez was 17.02. Cease was 14.97. That's pretty different than I thought.
Come on, Scat. Come on down.
And what was Framber's injury last year? I forgot he had elbow soreness in April.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
But I guess
funny.
I guess my point was just, even though we think of Cease as more of a categories guy, the downside risk is less in a points league for him. But that's kind of true for every pitcher.
When it goes wrong, it goes less wrong in a points league. Sure.
Yeah. And I did just want to point out, despite the year-to-year inconsistency for Dylan Cease, his last 3 years combined, it's a 3.40 ERA, 119 whip, 10.9 K per nine. Again, like, you're going to have to pair him with a better whip, but past 3 years still are near ace production. You're getting near ace production there from Dylan Cease. After Cease, we drop down a bit to the 4-5 turn, round 4-5 turn, where we have three names going right next to each other. George Kirby with an ADP of 48, Blake Snell 48.3, and Gerrit Cole at 49.5. George Kirby, what's up?
They're all basically the same guy. It makes perfect sense that they're all going in the same range.
It's
couldn't be more similar. George Kirby and Blake Snell.
Definitely an interesting group here. George Kirby finished SP 18 last season. He returned $16 of value. Another solid season. He's been pretty consistent the last 2 years between a 3.35, 3.53 ERA, between a 104 and a 107 whip. He's got great control. Strikeouts clearly leave something to be desired. He's under a strikeout per inning. Feels like he's still searching for that secondary whiff pitch, but nothing has a whiff rate over 30%. So I don't feel comfortable projecting that's going to happen for George Kirby, but he's durable. He's reliable. He's somebody you draft for a high floor. Just feels more like an SP2 than an SP1.
I agree completely. I think people were pricing in a step forward, mainly in the strikeout department for him the past couple years. But I think they know better than to do that now. And I'm saying they because Chris may be even a little louder than me, was saying that this was always the case for George Kirby, that he's more of a rotation stabilizer, a number 2 type option in fantasy than a prospective ace. He's going to eat a lot of innings. He's going to have a low whip, but the strikeout rate's going to leave a little bit to be desired. And he gives up enough hits and enough home runs that the ERA might be higher than ideal too. Last year, I think it got skewed a little bit at 3.53. I would project lower than that. But that is within the realm of possibility for Kirby, given his profile. And so you have to weigh that in. And I just think it's pretty unlikely he's going to deliver ace numbers, but he should be a very strong option for you.
I think what's clear here is we are past the point of rotation anchors. And now we are at the point where I feel a lot better about everyone we're about to talk about if I've paired them with a guy with opposite strengths who complements them well. Where if I have Corbin Burnes, that's the guy I'm okay just not worrying about pitcher until the 8th round, like I was talking about. If I waited and got Chris Sale or Dylan Cease or one of those guys as my ace, that's where I'm probably thinking I need to take another pitcher in that range. And I don't love that. So this is the range where I'm mostly out on the overall value if I'm not necessarily out on the pitchers themselves.
Conversely, I would say that more drafts than not, I still don't have a pitcher yet. I'm passing up even Kirby.
I do have a Scott White special that I want to throw out there for George Kirby. 2 awful blow-up starts last year. 6+ earned runs in less than 4 innings in each of those starts. If you eliminate those 2, it's a 2.99 ERA and a .99 whip.
See,
he might win the AL Cy Young.
I knew that 353 got inflated, but I didn't do all the math to figure out how it got inflated.
It was even worse because I think one of those starts was like 11 runs, but 4 of them were earned or something.
Yeah, they changed it correctly. It was the most disastrous start of the season, but then there was a scoring change that took like 4 or 5 earned runs off the board.
This actually could have been like a 3.70 ERA into the season. For George Kirby. Chris, some of those pitchers you mentioned pairing up with Kirby, the next one up, Blake Snell, it makes a lot of sense if you just want to pair 2 pitchers together at this point in the draft. And Oh, Blake Snell, one of the most polarizing pitchers in all of fantasy baseball. He signed a 5-year deal with the Dodgers this offseason. More on that in just a second, but it's always a wild ride with Snell. Here are the facts. Last 3 years combined, 2.82 ERA, 1.16 whip, 12 K per nine. If you can stomach it, he has exceeded 130 innings just twice in his career. Both times he won the Cy Young when he did that. And while the Dodgers will provide a lot of run support, they're going to be a great team. There's no doubt. They're going to use a 6-man rotation, like we mentioned, which will limit volume, will limit 2-start weeks if they ever happen for any of their pitchers. So I'll throw it to Chris first, even though I think I know the answer. Do you have the stomach for Blake Snell in the 4th or 5th round?
There are 2 different questions in there. Yes, I have the stomach for Blake Snell. Blake Snell is predictably unpredictable. He is consistently inconsistent. I'm sure there's another pair of words I could throw out there, but I'm not clever enough to get to them. So we'll just stick with those. But
can I shoehorn the numbers real quick?
Well, just one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
I have the stomach for it because I know going in what the Blake Snell ride is, and that when he's great, he's never as great as he seems. When he's terrible, he's certainly never as terrible as he seems. And at the end of the day, the numbers should be pretty good. The volume, not going to be great, but the numbers should be pretty good. But if you don't have the stomach for it, don't get on the ride. My wife has a lot of motion sickness issues. And she's like, if she's ever like, let's go on a boat ride. It's like, no, it's going to ruin the whole day. We can't do it. You gotta know that with Blake Snell, take some, what's the motion sickness drug? You got to bring some
Dramamine?
of that. You got to bring some Dramamine with you if you're going to draft Blake Snell. I can't do it in the 5th round. I think that is bonkers, but more power to you if you want to live life on the edge.
Bonkers. That's a big
bonkers
word. It's a telling word. Okay, so I had Grok calculate this for me. It took a little bit of haranguing. It wasn't being as literal. I found you kind of have to train the AI to take you the right way because it's almost too smart for its own good. Anyway,
I'm afraid I can't do that, Scott.
If it's wrong, blame Grok. But Blake Snell over the past 4 seasons, April through June, a 4.15 ERA, a 1.39 WHIP, 11.2 K per nine. So really the ERA and WHIP we're looking at. April through June, last 4 years, 4.15, 1.39. July through September, 256, 112. The K per nine is 12.5 in that case. So it's been a pretty clear pattern. It sometimes starts earlier, some years it sometimes starts later, but really rough starts, like to the point he's unusable. And then it locks into place, and sometimes he's so dominant to close out the season, like in 2023, that he's the Cy Young winner. And frankly, he was more like that last year too. It's just there were those groin injuries built in, so he got fewer starts overall. But the turnaround happened earlier in the year, which is why the final numbers were so good. When he's locked in, he is your MVP. I mean, that was my experience having Blake Snell last year. I didn't mind it so much. What it ultimately comes out to, I was given the stats from 4 seasons earlier. Now it's going to be the last 3 seasons. A 2.82 ERA, 1.16 WHIP, 12 K per nine. I mean, if you just saw those numbers in isolation, that's an obvious ace. Even if you're only giving him 140, 150 innings, that's somebody worth drafting among the top 12 pitchers. I don't know that I want to do it in round 4, and I might hesitate even to do it in round 5. It depends what caliber of hitters are left. But sometimes he slides beyond that. Like what you're hearing during these early stages of the pitcher rankings is I might take one, but it'll have to be at a value. And Blake Snell is somebody who, given all the baggage he comes with, he's sometimes the value.
And definitely better in a roto or categories league,
Yes.
because like Dylan sees, the inefficiency limits quality starts for those who play in a head-to-head points league. So just keep that in mind.
Has never averaged 6 innings per start in his career. I think he's only gotten to 5 2/3 innings once in 9 years.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. He's a workhorse now, Chris, so things might change out in LA. Let's wrap up with Gerrit Cole, one of the best pitchers of this generation. It's
going to be a 10-minute conversation, Frank.
Should we just wrap up? Should we just
No.
pick it back up tomorrow?
No, let's get it. Let's squeeze him in.
All right. Well, the elephant in the room for Gerrit Cole, he missed 2.5 months with right elbow inflammation last year. There are a lot of innings on that arm, and on the surface, he was still solid once he returned. 3.41 ERA, 113 WHIP, over a strikeout per inning, but his velocity dropped for a second straight year, and he threw his slider less than usual. Is that related to the injury? I don't know. I think it's maybe something to pay attention to in spring and early on in the season this year, but it did happen. He is one of the toughest to rank, but Scott, given the injury concerns, the age, the velocity declining, the lack of slider usage, I'm out. What about you? Did Scott freeze?
I think Scott froze.
All right, Chris, I'm out. How about you?
I wasn't sure if it was just a pregnant pause or not. Yeah, I'm out at this price. He's SP 14 for me, but I'm really struggling with what to actually do with it. And I kind of think, like, I look at, gosh, like 10 through, I don't know, maybe 12. I don't know, 10 through 25. And I kind of want everyone to be lower than they are, but I don't want to move the guys below them above them. So it's just kind of, it's not that I dislike them. I think there's plenty of talent here, but it's like a mixture of guys like Gerrit Cole on the decline and guys who aren't quite there yet. And I don't know quite how to handle it. And so with Cole, it's a 34-year-old whose velocity has fallen 2 straight years and has fallen 2 miles per hour on average in the past 2 years. And a part of me just doesn't want to overthink it beyond that. On the other hand, like, Saris released his pitcher rankings today, and he said the stuff plus on almost all of his pitches was basically identical to the previous year. A little lower, but not so much that it would make you think that he's completely lost it. I think the biggest key is, can he throw the slider more? Because that went from being his clear number 2 pitch prior to last year to 4th in his arsenal. And it didn't really go up as the season went on. And even like, he pitched well in the playoffs, but if I'm remembering correctly, there were like no strikeouts in the playoff run that he had. 22 strikeouts in 29 innings is a pretty bad number. And so
it was 6.8 K per 9, a 10% K minus walk rate in the postseason.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know. Part of me just thinks we should probably just expect him to continue to decline, but the decline phase might be pretty okay. Like, he won a Cy Young in 2023, despite the strikeout rate falling, because he's gotten better at limiting hard contact. He's kind of pulling the Justin Verlander as he aged as well, but it just,
there's a wider range of outcomes that we're used to. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if he turns back into 2023 Gerrit Cole and is like a top 5 pitcher for fantasy. That's within the range of outcomes. Maybe I'm just being a Yankee pessimist, but it's just a lot of the signs that just point to, like, age, velocity, elbow stuff. Yeah, like, as a top 12 starting pitcher in ADP, that's pretty scary.
And it just, look, he's 34. Obviously, he's not as good as he was when he was 31. But it just, there are both more ways it can go wrong, and the ways it goes right aren't as impressive, I think, is the range of outcomes for Corbin Burnes. So I'm kind of just deferring to, Gerrit Cole. I'm kind of just deferring to the name Gerrit Cole in ranking him as my SP 14, but that's a little lower than the consensus. And again, it's just kind of this range of pitcher I'm probably not going to draft too much of.
Yeah, I don't know how many pitchers we actually revealed on today's episode that we want to draft at cost, but I'm sure we will get to some at some point.
That's because we're at the heart of the SP dead zone, Frank.
Ooh, you might be right. You might be right. Poor Scott. He did get disconnected because of his internet. That was a sign that we should have wrapped up before talking about Gerrit Cole, but I'm sure we'll get Scott's thoughts on Cole at some point this offseason. We are going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning into Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Goodbye. That is the end of today's podcast.
Bye-bye.